welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be talking about those out-of-touch comments that people make. The ones that make you wonder if they're even living in the same reality as you.
Right, the ones that leave you speechless.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to be using a really interesting source for this deep dive, a viral Ask Reddit thread, where people shared tons of real-life examples of these comments.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these seemingly simple comments can actually reveal so much about how we see the world and how we interact with each other.
Absolutely. And some of these examples are just too good not to share. Okay, so picture this. A multi-millionaire boss complaining about how expensive boarding school is.
Oh, I can already see where this is going.
While his employee is sitting right there,
Fair.
knowing their entire salary wouldn't even cover a year's tuition.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a classic case of what we call privilege blindness. They might not even be trying to be mean, but they just lack the awareness of what it's like for people who don't have their level of wealth.
It's like they're speaking a completely different language. And speaking of different languages, this next one really highlights the gap between homeowners and renters. Someone's CEO actually suggested they just buy the place they're renting to deal with rising housing costs.
Wow, as if it were that simple.
Right. And get this. The CEO was already receiving a government pension and 2 part-time salaries on top of their CEO pay.
That's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Is it just a lack of awareness, or is there an element of self-centeredness there too? I mean, that comment just completely ignores the financial struggles that so many people face.
Exactly. It's like they assume everyone has the same resources and opportunities, which is just not true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, this disconnect isn't limited to finances either. It also pops up in emotionally charged situations, like funerals.
Oh, funerals are definitely a breeding ground for out-of-touch comments.
Right. One person on the thread said they were told, "You seem sad while grieving at a funeral." Like, really? No kidding.
It's almost unbelievable. It's like the speaker is so uncomfortable with the situation that they completely miss the emotional state of the person who's actually grieving.
And speaking of funerals, there were so many comments about people saying really insensitive things that seemed more about their own feelings than the actual loss. Like, one person shared a story about your dad's oldest friend saying, "You can't possibly imagine how upset I am. You haven't known him as long as I did."
Oh, wow. That's just... wow.
It's like they're trying to make someone else's grief all about them. And it gets even worse. There's another comment about a fourth wife whom the commenter had never even met, saying at the dad's funeral, "I'm so happy you ended up coming to support me. Don't be sad. At least your dad finally knew true love for a short time before he died. I'm grateful I could give his life meaning."
Seriously, it's like they see these emotionally charged situations as an opportunity to manage their own feelings instead of acknowledging the pain of the people who are actually grieving.
And it leads to these jaw-dropping comments where you're just left thinking, did they really just say that?
Exactly, and these comments really highlight the importance of considering the other person's perspective. I mean, funerals are obviously sensitive situations, but this applies to everyday interactions as well.
So true. It makes you wonder, what really drives people to make these out-of-touch comments? Is it just a lack of awareness, or are there deeper psychological factors at play? We'll be digging into that and more right after this.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on The Deep Dive.
And if you're enjoying this deep dive into the world of out-of-touch comments, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to Voices of the Soul and Shauna Pelage's YouTube channel. That way, you won't miss out on future deep dives. But stick around. We've got much more to unpack.
Absolutely, there's so much more to explore. Welcome back to The Deep Dive.
And we're back, diving deeper into the world of out-of-touch comments. As we were talking before the break, it's amazing how many of these comments center around money.
Yeah, finances and socioeconomic differences, it really underscores just how much our financial situation shapes the way we see things.
Absolutely, like we're looking through different lenses.
Exactly, different lenses.
And one commenter mentioned a wealthy friend who asked, "Why don't you just take more out of the ATM?" when they said they couldn't afford something.
Oh, wow.
And another commenter shared a story about a well-off friend suggesting, "Just buy everything you need for the month at once. It's cheaper that way." But the person was literally paying for gas with quarters. It's like they can't even fathom the idea of living paycheck to paycheck.
It's wild, right? And while these stories might be funny on the surface, they really point to a bigger problem in society, this lack of understanding and empathy between people from different socioeconomic backgrounds.
It's a huge blind spot, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not even just about material possessions. It extends to things like time and leisure, too.
Oh, absolutely. I saw a comment about someone being told to take a vacation and relax in Italy for a week or two to de-stress, as if everyone can just jet off to Europe like that.
Right. Or another person was asked why they didn't just stay in Portugal a few more weeks after they'd already saved up for a vacation there.
Yeah.
It's like there's this assumption that everyone has the same financial flexibility and freedom, which is just not true for a lot of people.
It's definitely not the reality for many people.
It's like they're speaking a totally different language, the language of privilege.
Yeah, the language of privilege.
But even though we're kind of laughing at some of these comments,
Hmm.
it's important to remember that words have power, right? Even if they're not meant to be hurtful, they can still have an impact.
They can make people feel unseen and misunderstood, and even a little bit less than.
Exactly. Like if you're constantly being told to just buy a house or take a vacation, when those things are just completely out of reach, it can really start to wear you down.
And you start to question yourself and your place in the world.
This isn't about pointing fingers or making fun of people. This deep dive is really about raising awareness and encouraging people to be more empathetic.
Yeah, to put themselves in other people's shoes.
We all have blind spots, and it's through these kinds of conversations that we can start to challenge our own assumptions and be more mindful of other people's experiences.
Because those experiences might be very different from our own.
Absolutely. And being mindful can really change the way we communicate with each other.
For sure.
Instead of jumping in with advice, sometimes the best thing we can do is just listen and validate how someone is feeling.
Validating their experience is so important.
And for those listening out there, have you ever been on the receiving end of an out-of-touch comment?
Or maybe you've made one yourself and cringed about it later.
Sharing these experiences, even those embarrassing ones, can be really helpful.
It helps us realize that we're not alone in this.
And that we can learn from each other.
Exactly. We can all learn from each other's stories.
So if you're willing to share, head over to the comments section of the Voices of the Soul podcast channel or Shauna Pelagia's YouTube channel.
It's a great way to connect with others who might be going through the same thing.
We're all in this together, and learning from each other is how we become more mindful and compassionate in our communication.
And remember, those stories can be powerful reminders that even though we might come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, we all share this basic human need for connection and understanding.
Well said. So before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the psychology behind why people make these out-of-touch comments in the first place.
Yeah, let's explore the why behind the comments.
Because sometimes it's not about being intentionally mean or insensitive, right? It's more about a lack of awareness or struggling to understand other people's realities.
Exactly. Stay tuned because we'll be getting into that right after this.
Welcome back to the deep dive. So before the break, we were discussing how these out-of-touch comments can make people feel unseen and misunderstood.
Right, like they don't really matter.
But now I want to kind of shift our focus and think about why people say these things in the first place.
Yeah, because it's not always about being mean or insensitive, right? Sometimes it's just a lack of awareness or a real difficulty in understanding other people's experiences.
It's like that saying, we judge others by their actions, but ourselves by our intentions.
Exactly, and intentions do matter, but we also can't ignore the impact of our words, right? Even if we don't mean to hurt someone, our words can still sting, especially when they touch on sensitive topics like financial struggles or grief.
It's true, words can have a huge impact.
And that's where cognitive biases come in.
Yeah.
Our brains are kind of wired to take shortcuts.
Yeah.
And sometimes those shortcuts can lead to biased thinking.
Like, what do you mean? Can you give an example?
Sure, so confirmation bias is a good example. It makes us more likely to notice and remember information that supports what we already believe.
Right, even if those beliefs are based on inaccurate or incomplete information.
Exactly. So if someone's always lived a comfortable life, they might unconsciously filter out information about people who are struggling financially because it just doesn't fit with their worldview.
It's like they're blind to it.
Yeah, kind of. And then there's the availability heuristic, which makes us judge how likely something is based on how easily we can think of examples of it.
Oh, I see.
So if someone is mostly surrounded by people who are like them, they might underestimate how common different perspectives and struggles really are.
It's like living in a bubble where everyone shares the same assumptions.
Exactly. And when you're in that bubble, it's easy to make comments that seem harmless to you, but they might land very differently for someone outside of that bubble.
It's like you're accidentally stepping on someone's toes because you didn't even realize they were there.
That's a great analogy. So given all of this, what can we do to be more aware of our own biases and avoid making those out-of-touch comments?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Well, first of all, I think we need to admit that we all have biases. It's part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
But once we recognize that, we can start to challenge our own assumptions and really try to see things from different perspectives.
So, like, how do we do that?
Well, we can read books and articles by people from different backgrounds, listen to podcasts, watch documentaries that expose us to different ways of life. Even just talking to people who have different opinions than our own can be really helpful.
It's all about broadening our horizons and realizing that our own personal experiences are just one tiny part of the whole human story.
Exactly. And when we hear those out of touch comments, whether they're directed at us or someone else, we can use those moments as opportunities for growth.
Instead of getting defensive.
Right. We can gently challenge those assumptions and educate others about different perspectives.
And just advocate for more empathy and understanding in our interactions. So it's not about calling people out or making them feel bad. It's about using those moments as teaching moments.
Exactly. And, those comments can be really good reminders that even though we come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, we all need connection and understanding.
So true. Well, we've talked about a lot in this deep dive, from funny out-of-touch comments to the psychology behind them. And for those listening, we'll leave you with this. How can we bridge the gap between our different realities and create more understanding in our interactions?
It's a question worth thinking about.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. So head over to the comments section of Voices of the Soul podcast channel or Shauna Palage's YouTube channel.
And remember, even small acts of kindness and understanding can make a big difference.
So well said. And that wraps up another deep dive. If you enjoyed this conversation about out-of-touch comments, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to Voices of the Soul and Shauna Poloni's YouTube channel for more thought-provoking content. We'll see you next time.